AMG is changing. And it's not a little change, it's quite the contrast. Years ago, this car perhaps sowed the seeds of change, or rather, a return to AMG's racing roots. It's a switch that legislation made necessary, but it's one this latest AMG GT Black Series has fully embraced, to devastatingly brilliant effect. You can help support these videos by joining the Hagerty Drivers Club. It includes a subscription to our award-winning magazine, unlimited access to our valuation tool, 24/7 flatbed roadside assistance, free classified listings, exclusive coupons and offers, and early access and VIP perks to select Hagerty events. More info in the link below. The Ultimate SLS was launched in 2012 at a price of £230,000, and to be honest, nobody really knew what to expect, because the back catalogue of the Black Series cars had been a bit of a mixed bag. The Black in Black Series refers to carbon fibre, and all had been two doors, but other than that, there'd been no discernible continuous thread through all the models. From SLK to CLK, from SL to C63, they'd felt like cousins rather than siblings. And then came the SLS Black Series, which wasn't just different to other Mercedes. The SLS Black Series felt like a contrast to everything else on the road really when it came out, and in some ways it still does. It's just so sort of excessive, big. It's almost like a sort of 1920s throwback in some ways, with this huge, and I do mean huge, bonnet. I feel like you could, I don't know, set out a full dinner party on it, or play table tennis across it or something. And then there's this engine, this 6.2 litre naturally aspirated engine. Despite the shorter final drive, this engine still feels, well, you have to really think about revving it all the way out. It's just extraordinary. Revs to 8,000 RPM, 622 brake horsepower, 468 pounds-foot of torque, which is actually 11 pounds-foot down on the standard SLS. But this is lighter. 70 kilos or 154 pounds in fact. At 1550 kilos it's not light as a feather, but then an SLS coupe of any flavour has always looked like it could fly, thanks to its spectacular doors. As I'm sure you know, they hark back to the 1952 300 SL, specifically the W194 race car that led to the W198 road car. And while the modern SLS has incorporated the gull wings for purely theatrical reasons, they were originally a practical solution. You see, the original's tubular space frame chassis was light, but to improve its strength it was also tall at the sides and wide in the sills, which meant conventional doors would have been tiny and made access very tricky. But by doing what Bugatti had done with the Type 64 and cutting into the roof and fitting the hinges up top, things were slightly better and much more stylish. Now, while the SLS Black Series doors may be identical to the normal SLS, the chassis definitely isn't. This was a big improvement on the standard SLS. Suddenly the whole car seemed to sort of move more as one. Sometimes with the normal car, front and rear didn't necessarily talk to each other. This was a whole different ballgame. They likened it to a GT3 race car, and you can see what they mean. The SLS is one of those cars that corners exactly like it looks, flat. As well as very little roll, this was stiff too, particularly at the rear over bumps. The rear could get unsettled. Amazingly though, you learn to trust it. It doesn't exactly shrink around you. The extremities always feel out there, but there's this sort of centralisation of the mass as you start pushing harder, and it becomes somehow a little more dynamically compact. And although you sometimes still feel yourself rumbling over the cat's eyes, shrinking away from a dry stone wall, you can pilot it down a road with surprising pace and precision. This hardcore nature really did feel like a change for an AMG. The earlier CLK Black Series had had a fabulously entertaining chassis, but it didn't have this car's real road racer character. It really does give you all those feelings that if you turned up and sat on the start grid at the Nürburgring, you wouldn't be too out of place. This is still so good, 10 years on. So its successor has a lot to live up to. A decade on from the SLS and costing £100,000 more, the latest Black Series certainly packs even greater race car aggression into its looks, both at a distance with its monstrous adjustable aero and bigger grille, and up close when you notice things like the Cup 2R rubber and the support struts in the boot. Peel away the layers even further and there is a carbon fibre bonnet, thinner glass front and rear, ball joints in the rear suspension, adjustable anti-roll bars and, somewhere deep inside, the world's first carbon fibre transmission mount. All in, it weighs 15-20 kilos, not super light but 35 kilos lighter than an AMG GTR and 30 kilos lighter than the SLS. But is that manifest in the driving experience? As soon as you set off in the AMG GT Black Series, you can tell it's from the same family as the SLS. Not just the Mercedes clan, but the Black Series family. You've got various touch points, obviously, like these seats, which are identical, and then you look in the door mirrors and realise they're exactly the same. But there's the same race car feel to this. Even in comfort mode, when you turn into a corner, the instant reaction of that front end, that's what lends this in particular, I think, its really extreme feel. I think the dampers in this in Sport Plus are probably equivalent to what the SLS has in its standard normal setting, in fact. So this definitely feels more usable. You've got that fantastic lateral grip in here, but you've just got a little bit more roll as well, which is lovely. I really like that. It doesn't feel less aggressive. It doesn't lack any of those race car vibes, I don't think. In some ways you've got more. You look around the cabin and things like the traction control switch here, the carbon you can see on the rear hatch, and obviously that enormous rear wing. They'll give you those race car vibes, but just in terms of that, well, I suppose improved damper technology since the SLS, this instantly feels a bit more, well, yes, usable. It fits with the interior, which, as with all Black Series, is a curious mix. It's by no means completely stripped out, which feels like an odd contrast at first. But this somehow serves to highlight the extraordinary nature of the car. It doesn't just ignore or totally compromise the road part of Road Racer. You can imagine using and enjoying it an awful lot, putting miles on it. Seemingly whatever the speed in this car, you're getting feel from it through the chassis. I'd say the steering's not quite as feel, so certainly not straight away, but the rest of the chassis instantly feel where it is. And like the SLS, the harder you push in this, the more you energize it, the more it comes together, the more it comes to you, the more feel you get from it, the happier it seems in a way. The steering seems to come to you that bit more. You think about getting some warmth into those tyres. You really feel like you can place it so accurately. That agility of the front end that gives you the sort of excitement, the feels at lower speed as you increase. Just lets you thread it down a road like this. You can certainly see why this set such a blistering time around the Nürburgring. because for all its aggression, it almost becomes friendlier the faster you go. It has that SLS thing of being somehow more compact, more centralised.
That Nürburgring lap time, by the way, was a phenomenal 6 minutes 43.6 seconds with Maro Engel at the wheel. And it wasn't just down to downforce and the chassis. The 4-litre twin-turbo V8 received a staggering amount of attention in Affalterbach for a car only produced in 1700 units, albeit that was considerably more than the 350 examples of the SLS. The LS2 variant of the M178 engine uses a flat plane crank rather than the standard GT's cross-plane crank, allowing for higher revs and bigger turbos, with the outputs rising to 720 brake horsepower and 590 pounds-foot of torque. It is, as it always has been, a fabulous engine, but just not quite the centrepiece, the crux of the whole car that the previous motors have been.
It's sort of on a hiding to nothing. It can't be as emotional and exciting as that incredible naturally aspirated V8 in the SLS. But the way that this makes its greater performance more accessible is really enjoyable. The sound I don't think is as good as the standard car. Boy does it rev, and this has shorter gears as well. So you really feel like you can use all those revs. And there's a definite GT2 RS punch to the way this accelerates. Superbly powerful carbon ceramic brakes on this. Perhaps I'd like just a little bit more progression at the top of the pedal. Curiously, you've got sliding calipers on the back, which the optics of those is not great, but there's certainly no doubting the performance of the braking system overall. Something I would change, these paddles, I think, if I could. I think they're such an important connection point, and whilst I get the rest of this wheel fits with this interior, I think the paddles, it would be nice to have something, I don't know, a bit more befitting of the gearbox, because it's a really good gearbox, and when you ramp it all the way up to race, you get, again, like the SLS, some of those more hardcore vibes with it.
It makes me so happy that this AMG GT Black series really does take up where the SLS left off, evolving the raw road racer formula further while maintaining that Mercedes undertone of usability. It's a beguiling blend. And I love that while legislation has forced Affalterbach's developmental hand with the literal and emotional downsizing of engines, AMG seems to have met the challenge head on. It's taken the chance to change, shift some of the focus away from what it's known for and double down on what it started in the SLS Black series, creating one of the sharpest and most engaging chassis in the business. AMG has truly turned a negative into a positive.